Google Trends show that an internet user appears to have searched for Nancy Guthrie's home address in the weeks prior to her disappearance. Once by someone in Arizona in June of 2025, and once again in January and on January 11th. A date that was also of interest to investigators originally when they asked Ring camera users for video from that day, January 11th. Other related searches within the last year included images or a map of Nancy's home and a search for Savannah Guthrie's salary back in December.
The investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance just hit a wall that nobody saw coming. Not from the suspect, not from a dead end in the physical evidence, from Google. The tech giant that powers more than 8 billion searches every single day just publicly disputed one of the most widely circulated pieces of evidence in this entire case. A piece of evidence that millions of people had already accepted as proof of premeditation. A piece of evidence that generated thousands of tips, reshaped public perception of this kidnapping, and may have pointed investigators toward leads that were never real to begin with. And here is the part that should stop you cold. If Google is right, then a key pillar of the theory that this crime was carefully planned, that the suspect spent months researching Nancy's home, mapping her property, and tracking her famous daughter's income, that entire pillar may have been built on data that Google's own system invented. Not found, not leaked, invented. So here is the only question that matters today. Did the FBI build part of their investigative lead on evidence that a free marketing tool generated automatically, with no human being behind it at all? Stay with me, because by the time we are done, you are going to see this case and what it means for every person watching in a completely different way.
Search for Nancy Guthrie, there have been setbacks and challenges and still no suspect. But some 400 FBI agents and sheriff deputies are still actively working the case, canvassing the city as they try to find answers to so many of the unknowns.
Part of what makes this search so challenging is just how vast the area around Nancy's home is. You can get a sense of it here. Pima County is about 9,000 square miles. That is larger than the entire state of New Jersey. And a lot of it looks like this: massive mountain ranges and the Sonoran Desert that stretches for miles.
But the Pima County Sheriff says the case is far from cold. They're still analyzing unknown DNA found at Nancy's home and other leads, including the suspect's backpack, gun, and what the sheriff has described as his unique-looking holster. Firearms expert John Correa says it appears to be a universal fit holster and isn't one an experienced gun owner would use.
This does not strike me as a highly trained professional. This guy's an amateur.
The search for Nancy also expanding. A missing persons group in Mexico sharing this flyer about her disappearance, although the sheriff maintains there's no evidence to suggest she was taken across the border. And many across Tucson are refusing to give up hope.
Whenever we go out, we say, okay, look for any clues or anything different as we go along that you wouldn't normally see.
Inside the county's 911 communication center, dispatchers inundated with tips. Some 50,000 tips have come in between the sheriff's department and FBI combined.
What do you think it says that you're getting so many tips about this case?
I think it says that people care.
And the dispatch manager also tells us that while they are getting tips, they're able to pass along to investigators. She says they're also getting bogged down with people calling in with everything from their theories on the case, their opinions about it. Even some are giving their premonitions about the case. She asked that if you do want to call in, that you stop and think first, is this viable, credible? Is it something that an investigator can actually act upon?
To understand why Google's statement hit so hard, you have to understand just how convincing the evidence looked before it arrived. On February 18th, Fox News Digital published what immediately became the most shared report in this entire investigation. Their story claimed that Google Trends data showed a pattern of searches tied to Nancy Guthrie's home address in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona. And it was not one search. It was not a single moment of curiosity. It was a pattern, a timeline, a sequence of digital behavior that, when laid out in order, looked exactly like what investigators call pre-offense surveillance. According to Fox's report, data appeared to show activity connected to Nancy's home address between June 21st and June 28th of 2025. That is 7 months before she was taken. 7 months before anyone outside of this family had any reason to believe she would become the target of a federal kidnapping investigation. Then the data showed a second hit on January 11th of 2026, 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Fox also identified 2 separate Google image searches connected to her address, one between March 1st and 8th of 2025, another between November 30th and December 1st. These were not regular text searches. These were image searches, satellite views, map layouts, visual representations of the physical property. Someone was not just looking up where Nancy lived. They were looking at what her home looked like from above. Then there was the salary search. Fox reported that someone in Tucson appeared to have searched Savannah Guthrie's salary between December 13th and 20th of 2025, weeks before the kidnapping, in the same city where Nancy lived, as if someone was calculating the financial ceiling of a potential ransom demand before they ever knocked on a single door. Stack all of that together, an address search 7 months out, image searches for the property layout, a salary search for the famous daughter, all from Arizona, all on a timeline that ends at Nancy's front door at 2 in the morning. Criminal profiler and former FBI agent Jim Fitzgerald appeared on the Megyn Kelly show and said this pattern was entirely consistent with pre-offense behavior. The deliberate, methodical research a perpetrator conducts before committing a targeted crime. Security analyst Will Geddes called the data an absolute treasure trove, arguing that if law enforcement could trace that activity to a single IP address, the case could break open overnight. Within 24 hours of the Fox report going live, Newsweek ran it, Outkick ran it, Red State ran it, CNN's live blog referenced it. The narrative was locked. This was premeditated. This was targeted, and someone had left a digital trail proving it. The public consensus had not just leaned toward premeditation. It had arrived there, settled in, and started building furniture. And then Google stepped in and changed everything. On February 19th, just 24 hours after the Fox report went viral, Google issued a formal statement to both Newsweek and Fox News Digital. They did not hedge. They said what they had to say and let the implications land. Google explained that Google Trends is a tool built for understanding broad patterns across large data sets. It was designed for marketers, for researchers tracking whether interest in a topic is rising or falling over time. It was never designed to detect whether one specific person searched for one specific address on one specific day. But here is the part that cuts to the core of this entire controversy. When search volume for any term is extremely low, which a private residential address in Tucson absolutely would be, Google's system injects random statistical noise into the data, on purpose, as a privacy protection. Let that land for a moment. Google deliberately adds artificial data points to low-volume results to prevent anyone from using the tool to identify individual users. And when that noise is injected, the system cannot distinguish between a real search a real person made and a phantom data point the algorithm generated automatically. They look identical. There is no flag, no marker, no asterisk that says this one is real and this one is not. The spikes Fox identified could have been a real person building a profile on Nancy Guthrie, or they could have been generated automatically by a privacy algorithm doing exactly what it was programmed to do. Without a subpoena for Google's actual server data, there is no way to tell the difference using the public tool alone. Newsweek then deepened the problem. Their reporters attempted to independently reproduce the Google Trends data Fox had published. They could not. The same searches, run again in the same time ranges, did not return the same results. The data was not even stable enough to be reproduced by a second journalist 24 hours later. In one day, the single most compelling piece of digital evidence in this case went from a treasure trove to a question mark. But here is what matters, and this is the part almost nobody picked up on after Google's statement dropped. Fox's own report contained the evidence that undermined its own findings. sitting right there in the article the whole time. To provide context, Fox included comparison searches showing that Anderson Cooper's salary generated a spike from New York City in early 2025, and that Sean Hannity's salary spiked from New York around the same period. These were framed as benign reference points, but that comparison does not support Fox's argument. It destroys it. If celebrity salary searches routinely generate spikes in cities connected to those personalities, then a spike for Savannah Guthrie's salary in Tucson is not evidence of a kidnapper doing financial reconnaissance. It could just as easily be someone who saw Savannah on the Today Show that morning and got curious about what she earns. That kind of casual search happens millions of times a day. And in Google Trends, it generates the exact same visual signature as deliberate pre-offense research. Fox provided the rebuttal to its own story inside the story. It just did not recognize it. But here is the deeper question the data debate buried entirely. Why did Google issue this statement at all? Nobody sued them. Nobody subpoenaed their public response. They were under no obligation to say a single word about this case. They chose to speak, and that choice was not accidental. Google's entire business model rests on one foundational promise to its users. What you search for is private. The moment the public believes a free tool on the open internet can identify whether a specific person searched for a specific address on a specific date, that promise fractures. People self-censor. They use competitors. The advertising ecosystem built on understanding human curiosity begins to erode. Google was not just correcting a news report. They were protecting the most valuable asset they own, your willingness to tell them everything. The people who actually understand federal investigations have been consistent throughout this entire debate. That debate is happening in the wrong room. Robert McDonald, a former United States Secret Service agent and professor at the University of New Haven, has explained that in cases like this, every single tip must be triaged, read, evaluated, cross-referenced, and run out. Even tips that seem minor can become pivotal. But the process consumes investigative hours at a rate most people never consider. And in a case where time is not a neutral variable, that cost is almost impossible to overstate. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Brad Garrett has spoken repeatedly about the separation between investigative tools and public information tools. A subpoena, he has noted, returns a fundamentally different category of data than anything accessible through a consumer-facing product. Server logs, account linkages, device fingerprints, that is the actual evidence. Everything else is inference. A source familiar with this specific investigation told Fox News Digital something that functions almost as a direct confirmation of where the real work is happening. They said that law enforcement uses investigative tools like subpoenas, not publicly available marketing information. That one sentence changes the entire context of the public debate. Here is what makes this case unlike almost anything playing out in public right now. The FBI almost certainly already knows the answer to the question that has consumed social media for 2 days. Think about the scale deployed here. 400 investigators from multiple federal and local agencies are assigned to finding Nancy Guthrie. FBI Director Kash Patel personally posted the doorbell footage from his own social media account. The President of the United States directed the Department of Justice to seek the most severe punishment if Nancy is not returned alive. The FBI increased its reward to $100,000, with a private donor adding another $100,000 through Tucson Crime Stoppers. This is not a county sheriff working a missing persons case with a skeleton crew. This is the full institutional weight of federal law enforcement with personal involvement from the highest levels of government. Given that investment, the idea that investigators waited longer than 72 hours to subpoena Google for the actual search records is not credible. They pulled the server logs in the first week, possibly the first 72 hours. Which means the FBI already knows whether those searches were real. They know the IP addresses. They may know the device, the account, the browser, or they know the searches were noise and the entire public theory of digital premeditation was a phantom. The public has been debating this for 2 days. The FBI settled it weeks ago. That gap between what the public argues about and what investigators already know is the space this entire case lives in right now. And until an arrest is made, that gap does not close. But here is what matters beyond this case, beyond Nancy, beyond Google and the FBI. This kidnapping has forced millions of people to confront something about their own lives they had never thought about. If this crime was planned, the suspect did not need to hack anything. They did not need special access. Nancy's home address sits on a public property tax record on the county assessor's website. Satellite imagery of her property is on Google Maps. Savannah Guthrie's estimated earnings have been published on celebrity finance websites for years. A complete profile of where Nancy lives, what her home looks like from above, and how much her daughter earns was available to anyone with an internet connection in 5 minutes. The reaction online was visceral. People expressed fury that private residential addresses are indexed and searchable by anyone on Earth. Others drew direct lines to their own lives. Elderly parents living alone, homes that could be found and mapped by a stranger in minutes. One sentiment repeated across every platform: no one's address should be this easy to find. The fact that it is, people argued, is not a technical limitation. It is a policy failure. A deliberate choice by data broker companies that profit from aggregating personal information in a legal environment that has refused to catch up. This case did not create that problem, it revealed it. But here is what matters when you step back from the data debate and look at what the physical evidence actually tells us. Google's statement pulled one brick from the wall. The wall is still standing. Look at what is not in dispute. A masked, gloved, armed individual arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home between 1:47 and 2:12 in the morning on February 1st. They were carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker backpack sold exclusively at Walmart. They knew exactly where the Nest doorbell camera was positioned and covered the lens with vegetation pulled from the yard. Not vegetation they brought, vegetation growing on that specific property. Which means they had studied the physical layout of that home carefully enough to know what was growing next to the front door before they arrived. Nancy's pacemaker data showed a disconnection event at 2:28 in the morning. Her blood was found on the front porch. Ransom notes demanding millions in Bitcoin were sent to media outlets in the days that followed. And then there is the DNA. A glove recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home contained a DNA profile that does not match Nancy, any known associate, or any of the more than 19 million profiles in the FBI's CODIS database. Whoever wore that glove has no prior qualifying arrest in the federal system. That led investigators to investigative genetic genealogy, the same technology that identified Brian Koberger in the Idaho student murders and unmasked Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer after decades of anonymity. C.C. Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at the lab conducting this analysis, told NBC News she is extremely hopeful about the evidence, but the timeline is honest. In the Koberger case, it took 6 weeks. If the suspect has limited representation in consumer DNA databases, it could take longer. The Google Trends data was one data point in a much larger picture. Removing it did not change what the camera captured. It did not change the blood on the porch. It did not change the glove. It did not change the DNA. The footage proves operational precision on its own. Day 26. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker last recorded functioning at 2:28 in the morning on the day she was taken. She has no access to her heart medication. Every hour that passes is an hour an elderly woman with a compromised cardiac device is somewhere that is not home. That reality does not pause while analysts debate whether a data spike was real or algorithmic. It keeps moving forward. relentlessly. 400 investigators are working this case. 19,000 tips have come in, and every one must be read, evaluated, and run out. The Google Trends debate almost certainly generated hundreds of tips built on a theory that may have had no human being behind it at all. And every hour spent on a phantom lead is an hour not spent on the glove, the backpack, the DNA, the genealogy. That is the hidden cost of misinformation in a live case. It does not just mislead the public. It pulls resources from the real work at the exact moment Nancy can least afford it. So where does this actually leave us? Google's statement weakened the public's confidence in one piece of evidence. It did not resolve the case. It did not clear a suspect. It did not change what the doorbell camera showed. What it did was remind us that there are two completely different investigations happening right now. The one the public is running on social media with free tools and shared screenshots, and the one 400 federal agents are running with subpoenas, server logs, DNA databases, and genealogy labs. Those two investigations are not the same thing. They never were. The next development in this case will not come from a Google Trends chart. It will come from a genealogy result, a financial transaction, a tip that connects the Ozark Trail backpack to a specific purchase, or a DNA profile that unlocks a family tree. The people in this community understand the difference between noise and signal. You have been following this case with more precision and more skepticism than most of the commentary I have seen anywhere. That is not flattery. It is observation. The next video breaks down exactly where the genealogy investigation stands, what a realistic timeline looks like based on comparable cases, and what investigators would need to find in that DNA data to make an arrest. If you want to understand what comes next, that is where we are going. Subscribe if you have not already. Share this with someone who wants the full picture, not just the headline. And drop your analysis in the comments, because this community has caught things that cable news missed. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 26 days. The search continues.